Hello and welcome. I am Cyril Stober. President Tinubu says he is committed to bringing about a transformative administration in fiscal policy and taxation. First, he appointed a special advisor on revenue. He then went further to set up a presidential committee on fiscal policy and tax reforms. The objective, viable and cost-effective solutions to issues such as multiplicity of revenue collection agencies, the high cost of revenue administration, the excessive burden of compliance on ordinary taxpayers, the lack of coordination between fiscal and other economic policies across levels of government, and poor accountability in the utilization of tax revenues. The committee is made up of experts from both the public and private sectors. Today, I sit with the chairman of the committee, an accomplished strategist in fiscal policy, taxation, and economic matters, author and associate professor at Babcock University, and until recently, fiscal policy partner and Africa tax leader at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele. Welcome to One on One.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stober. It's a pleasure to be on your one-on-one program.
Right, thank you. Historically, the taxman was not loved. I mean, back in the ages, whoever had that responsibility to collect taxes was, I dare say, hated. You think that reflects, even in modern times, on the perception of collection of taxes and payment of dues?
I would say yes, certainly 100%. I think that society has agreed that the benefits of paying taxes are so enormous, we wouldn't ask the people to vote whether to pay taxes or not. Otherwise, we no longer have a society. It's at the very heart of the social contract, where the people will give their powers to people they've elected. They agree to part with their resources in the way of taxes, and in return, those elected leaders will then use that to take care of the people, to maintain law and order, to ensure that there's infrastructure, social services. But the interesting thing is, everyone sometimes, maybe I shouldn't overgeneralize, wish it's someone else that is paying it and not them. So, and I'll say that it's the case in most countries around the world. I haven't seen anywhere where the citizens are so excited and they said, I can't wait to pay my taxes. But they pay it all the same. So it's more difficult in a country like Nigeria, unfortunately, because it's painful to pay the tax. It's more painful to pay the tax and not to see the benefits in a manner that is commensurate to that sacrifice that you have made. And we are very familiar with this common saying of, I feel like I'm a local government in Nigeria because I generate my power, I provide my electricity, I provide my water, security in my estate and roads, and the list goes on and on. So the answer is yes, that feeling is still there. And I think the role of government is to make that pain more bearable.
Okay. But then that's also responsible for why lots of people have devised means to either avoid paying taxes completely or to pay as little as possible.
Yes. I think that's even putting it mildly. When people try to avoid, what we see that is pervasive is evasion. Avoidance, without sounding technical, is when you try to arrange yourself, your affairs within the law to minimize your taxes. So without violating the law. Whereas evasion is where you just either don't disclose or you under-disclose your income, or you disclose your income but you just don't pay. So that's very common in our climate, unfortunately. So in one of my roles at the Nigerian Economy Summit Group, we got some funding from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we conducted a national study around what we call the tax perception of Nigerians, adults, as well as small businesses and large firms. And it was, even for me, it was surprising that of all the countries around the world that I have seen, I'm not saying this is the lowest, but of all the countries I have seen, Nigeria was the lowest in terms of the tax morale. Tax morale is really your belief that it's okay to pay your taxes and that evasion is wrong and it should be punished. So it turns out only 17% of Nigerian adults feel like they should be paying their taxes. When we asked businesses, it went up slightly to about 29-30%. So between businesses and adults, you're easily looking at 65% don't want to pay their taxes, and they will do everything to evade paying their taxes. We then asked them why. The number one reason they gave is, they said we do not trust governments. The second reason they gave is, well, the little we paid, what did they use it for? They said there was so much corruption in the system. And the third reason that they gave was, they said the system is just too complicated, that even when you want to pay your taxes, the process of paying it is so discouraging. Understanding the laws themselves is difficult. And sometimes we seem to make those laws for multinational companies, high net worth individuals who can hire consultants. But the reality is that the vast majority of our people can't afford anybody to help them. We need to simplify it. It's so easy for them to do it on their own, for those who are willing to do the right thing. So in summary, I'll say yes, the tax perception and tax morale in Nigeria is not where it needs to be. It's a journey, and I think that journey needs to start now, and over time, it can get better.
Let me put this to you too. Is it also true that you hear this said often around these parts, that it's the small guys who pay the taxes, the big guys don't? And even amongst the small guys, you find that it's those who are in public service, because it's from source. The deductions are from source, and so they can do little or nothing about that, and their taxes just go straight on. But in the meantime, big businesses find ways of not paying their taxes, and you tend to see a lot of ostentatious living within society, and you wonder. In fact, some would tell you that just step out and attend any Nigerian function and see the number of luxury automobiles, or sometimes private jets, and people wonder, do these people pay any tax?
It's sad, let me put it that way. I was involved with the government, I think this was 2016 or maybe 15, when we were working on the voluntary asset and income declaration schemes, which was really a tax amnesty to say, for those who haven't been paying their taxes, please come forward and remediate, otherwise there will be consequences. In that process, it was the time that the former Vice President, Professor Osibajo, was acting as the president. So he launched the program at the State House, and I was there. And it was very instructive that the data made available to him from Joint Tax Board and all the tax authorities in Nigeria said that 96% of the personal income tax revenue collected in Nigeria at the time were paid by, I would say, low-income earners in employment through PAYE, like you said, because they had no choice. Somebody deducted it before giving them whatever was left of their salaries. And this is really very different from what you find elsewhere in the world. In South Africa, for example, the top 1% of the population pays more than the rest of 99% of the population, with very high exemption threshold for poor people. It took us almost 2-3 years to convince ourselves in Nigeria to even exempt minimum wage from personal income tax. Given that first, that minimum wage is so small, it's not enough for you to live, it's not a living wage. And on top of that, you then need to pay taxes. And then you're asking yourself, how about the guys who are making all the billions? So what has happened up till now is that those wealthy people and large firms have the resources to lobby. So they pretty much can write the rules taxes the way they want them to be. And therefore, they end up, not paying enough. And there are also a good number of them who just evade taxes, even including politicians. In the last election rounds, this was something I, took up personally because I felt pained that poor people were paying taxes and the rich people were not. And in the law, it says if you want to be anything, senator, honorable, governor, you needed to pay your taxes and show your tax clearance certificate. So I started this campaign, and the FRS chairman, who is also the chairman of the Joint Tax Board, said, wow, this is something we should do. Got everybody involved who needed to be involved. But it didn't work. It turns out that there were people who were contesting, and they had never paid personal income tax. So at the point of doing their screening, they went around going to tax authorities to say, well, I need tax clearance certificate. The law says you must have paid for the past 3 years at the minimum. So the bit that was very painful for me is that many of the state tax authorities then said, well, we're going to publish a list for you with rates. If you wanted to be senator, pay this amount. It was a shopping list. And some of the candidates at the time decided to go to another state where the rate was lower. I thought this was a mockery of the system.
Right.
Because the whole reason why that was in the constitution that says declare your income honestly and pay your taxes at the right time to the appropriate authority was about your character, not just the contribution to society. If you were not decent and honest enough to declare your income and pay your taxes, then maybe you should not be presiding over taxpayers' money.
Right.
Yeah, so that was something we missed out in the last elections. I'm hoping that, God willing, in the next one, the story will be different.
Of course, it would be one of the things that your committee would be looking into. But beyond that, we also had a situation, or we do still have a situation, where there are all kinds of taxes. And sometimes it's easy to describe the populace as tax weary because there are all kinds. And they cut across states. You never know when you run into someone who will be posing as a collection agency. And these things have been on for quite a while. Why do you think it's persisted so long?
This is one of the biggest problems that we face within the fiscal space in Nigeria, and more specifically in terms of taxation. And it's not surprising that Mr. President had to call that out specifically during his inauguration speech around multiple taxation. I have been practicing taxation for over 20 years. Even as a young accountant at the time I started, this was one of the things they told us in the class during induction, even before getting my job during ICANN exams. And every single person you speak to, whether in the private sector or in the public sector, would agree that this is a problem, yet nobody was doing anything about it. It's gotten so bad that around 2013, this was during the Jonathan era, I was involved with the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. I said, well, let's try and address this issue using data. So we're not just saying it. So MAN commissioned a project and asked their members across Nigeria. And just said, tell us the taxes you pay and give us copies of the receipt that you pay the taxes, so you are not making it up. It turns out that in some of the states, we had over 150 different taxes and levies and charges that manufacturers were paying. This is not what everybody was paying, just manufacturers alone. So we took this project to the NEC, National Economic Commission, so because we said this is not a problem for just one level of government. We went through that exercise, and at the end of the day, the official list of levies and taxes were reviewed, and it was still over 60. And I said, if you look at the data today, more than 98% of the revenue we collect at federal level, state and local government is coming from less than 10 taxes. Why do you have officially over 60, unofficially somewhere around 200? That is just there to frustrate people who want to live legitimately, who want to do the right thing, who want to be honest, who want to earn a living. We can't be doing that to ourselves. It's painful because not only are those people being punished and extorted, the money is not getting to government. So we are funding corruption and criminality in the middle to the extent that some of them are so resourced and powerful that they can become a problem to the state itself. So this is one of the key mandates for us. This is almost a must deliver requirement as far as Mr. President is concerned, that we have to fix it. So we hope that when we are done with this project, maybe this time next year, if we're having this conversation, I can then say, well, if this is the only thing we've done in my lifetime, maybe we have made progress. And that's to be able to reduce the number of taxes and levies that companies, individuals, and everyone has to pay across all levels of government to single digits.
All right. Well, the president made clear his intentions when he set up your committee and ruled out the mandate. And you have timelines within which to, in the short term, come up with something, about a month or so, to come up with a blueprint or something that is workable. He says in his speech that they want cost-effective, viable and cost-effective solutions. That's a tall order for you.
Yes, yes. Extremely tall order. But I like those challenges. And so I would say also for the members of the committee. So on one hand, I think there's a sense of urgency that I love, because I think like we've lost, maybe 2-3 decades. We can't continue with business as usual. So the time frame for my committee to do everything we have been given to do is 1 year, divided into milestones. The first one, like you rightly said, is the first 30 days, which started counting already. And that's for us to come up with what we call the quick wins, and then a blueprint. So quick wins will be things where we've generally agreed that it was the right thing to do, but nobody did anything about it. If you look at fuel subsidy removal today, and the impact that is having on people, especially the most vulnerable people, and you say, let's do CNG because it's cheaper for public transportation. So should we not find a way to ensure that there's no import duties and VAT when you're bringing those materials in? Should we not find a way to make it more affordable to do solar-powered energy provision at home? Should we not remove VAT on diesel, because that cost is going into production costs and it's increasing prices of goods and services and fueling inflation? So those things, we're hoping we can capture them under the 30-day plan, deliverable. And then on top of that, we then say to Mr. President, these are also the things we plan to do for the rest of the 1 year. The second milestone is the first 6 months. So the first 6 months is for critical reforms. This is where you need to rewrite the laws. In fact, we're so ambitious, we're looking at amending the Constitution, because some of the problems with multiple taxation and multiplicity of revenue collection agencies emanates from the Constitution itself, because there's no clarity as to taxing rights.
Yeah, well, while not cutting you short, in the early days, you were reported as having said, apart from the Federal Inland Revenue Service, almost all these other agencies should desist from collecting taxes.
Yes, that's the plan, that's the objective, that's the goal, that's the aspiration. We want to get to a point where government agencies that were set up, and you would agree with me, apart from the tax authority, which is at the federal government level, is the Federal Inland Revenue Service, no other agency was set up for the purpose of collecting revenue. So if you set up customs, you want border protection, trade facilitation. If you set up NCC, you want them to regulate telecommunications so that my costs don't drop.
Yeah, but some revenue derives from the functions of these agencies.
Yes, indeed, and I do agree. So we're not trying to stop them from those revenues. We're saying that it's a distraction when they are the ones trying to collect the revenue, because they were not set up to collect revenue. It's almost like asking a mechanic to help you prepare your accounts, right? So they're going to struggle, because the reason why they were trained wasn't to prepare financial statement. You should go to an accountant. So we're saying that we can create a system where the Federal Inland Revenue Service will help them collect those revenue. So the person paying you won't be able to tell You still go to the same place you are going to. You easily make your payments on your phone or bank transfers, including USSD, even without having a smartphone. So that way we get two benefits. One, those agencies will be able to focus on their primary functions without being distracted, which is good for them and good for society. Number two, the organization and institution that has been trained with the capacity to collect revenue will do it more efficiently. So which means what is left for us to take care of society is more than before. People, in my view, would actually pay less and government will collect more and society will develop. This is what you see around the world. HMRC in the UK, South African Revenue Service in South Africa, Kenya Revenue Authorities in Kenya. So I'm not even just talking about foreign, outside Africa countries. I'm talking about even African countries. And this is why their story, you would see, even in the UK, for example, even Social Security, you ask the tax, because they just know how to collect stuff. So that's what we need to do in Nigeria, instead of creating new agencies with collection functions. And that also, in a way, impacts on lack of transparency, because you can't really tell what they're collecting and how they're spending it.
But you do admit that some of this will have elements of the law, which means you need a recourse to amendments. That's the National Assembly.
Absolutely. Wow, I like that question. Thanks a lot for asking. Because part of the misinterpretation of what I've said about this particular issue, in fact, I saw one where they said, 62 or 3 agencies banned. I have no such powers. So it's a question that, which is why I said it's an aspiration. So it's a long journey. We're going to discuss with those agencies. We're going to understand what they are going through, what they want to do, and then what we think is best for the country. And then we can get ourselves to that meeting point. Once we agree on that meeting point, we then say, what should we do to make this happen? It may even be that you need to amend the constitution. That might take another 1 or 2 years. It might be that you need to amend the law setting up the agency. We created those laws ourselves. If they are no longer fit for our purpose, we would amend them. So this is where that multi-stakeholder approach will come in. We need to, as part of the work of my committee, engage with the governors. We need to engage with the National Assembly. We need to engage with organized private sector, institutions. So we're not leaving anyone behind. Nothing is cast in stone, but we believe that every single player and stakeholder in Nigeria wants this country to progress. And therefore, if we can demonstrate to them that what we're doing now is not the best for us, they will come along with us.
You're going to engage with the state governors, and I'm seeing that a lot of the complaints relating to taxation emanates from the states. Ask a driver who moves goods, even if it's agricultural produce, from one state to another. Every state they go through, they have to pay. Now, it doesn't even stop at that. Private vehicle owners, I have been witness to this so many times, who are driving from one part of the country to the other. They go through a state and they suddenly have an agency that pops up on the road and say, look, we don't care whether it is a federal road, it passes through our territory, you have to pay.
Indeed.
And all this goes on and on.
Yes.
Now, the states will tell you this is their own way of expanding their revenue base.
Yes.
How do you intend to navigate these waters?
Another very great question. So there was a guy, a gentleman, who got so frustrated with just moving from point A to point B, which could easily be just from Kano to Lagos. Maybe that's even a very long one. Sometimes it's just one state to another.
I'll tell you, even between Abuja
even within the city
and Plateau State,
yes,
you find areas where sometimes you go through Kaduna State and you have officials from Kaduna State demanding payments.
And then they're not polite in demanding for it. And sometimes that could be the difference of not getting to where you're going on time. It could be losing part of your, belongings, because they'll just remove your side mirror or something. So this gentleman got so frustrated, he just recorded the receipt that he got, moving from point A to B, with farm produce, there were 72 different receipts. 1,005, 3,000. Those things would add up. When you get to your destination, what you do as a business person is to add up to the selling price. And then we're surprised that there is so much inflation in Nigeria. Now, those 72 receipts, we will be lucky if 10% of them actually get to the government. So what we're going to be saying to these stakeholders is to use data. I think it was Damien that said, in God we trust. All of that must bring data. So the data is showing us that these IGR, internally generated revenue initiatives, haven't yielded results. So we're going to say to ourselves, what if we get rid of these almost 50 different taxes and replace with just one? And this one will give you 10 times what you were collecting before. And we have the data to show for it. Then the question is going to be, what is really your interest? Are you interested in the chaos, or do you want the money? Because I can assure you that you get the money. This was why Mr. President said, despite he has given us the mandate to reduce the number of taxes without introducing any new one, he says we must increase Nigeria's tax to GDP ratio from where it is currently around 10.8% to 18%. So you're going to be asking yourself, how do you remove taxes and then you collect more? And we are so confident that that is possible, because once you deal with this, chaotic way of administering taxes that really doesn't get to government, what will happen is, one, you close the tax gap. People who are not complying, using technology, data, and intelligence, you know who has resources and they're not paying. I bought a brand new car a few years ago in Lagos, and they didn't charge VAT. A brand new car is not something that poor people buy in Lagos. So, which goes back to what you said earlier on. You have poor people, they buy the charge card of 100 naira, they pay VAT. Then somebody buys a car of 30 million and they don't pay VAT. So, when you close that gap, and you also reduce the cost of collecting revenue, including the leakages going to individual pockets, and incentives. Some of them were designed like before I was born. It made sense at the time, but it's no longer sensible now. We haven't taken that step back to say, can we relook at them? So that savings from rationalizing incentives, reducing leakages and cost of collection, and closing the gap in compliance is where the magic is going to come from, whereas we're able to increase the revenue for government without imposing new taxes.
There's still one or two things to explore there, but I'd like to go quickly to the peculiar nature of Abuja, for instance, while you engage with the governors. Abuja, given its position, is it a state? It's administered like a state?
Yes.
It's run by a minister. The National Assembly makes its laws. There's a joke currently in town in Abuja, and that is, the minute the president talked about expanding the tax base and growing revenue, Abuja swung into action. And now you drive around the city, you find all kinds of agencies, all kinds of agents with their reflective jackets demanding all kinds of payments. It got so bad that vehicular movement at some point in time is seriously hampered. You have people who claim they are mobile advertising, collectors or stuff like that. People who demand for payment, for branding on vehicles, and so many other things. And they say, well, this is in keeping with the president's line of thought of increasing revenue.
So that picture you just painted is the past. It is where we're coming from. It is not the future where we're going to. That I can tell you 100%. So, of course, we can't rule out people taking advantage of whatever is said in a way that benefits them to do whatever they want to do. So this has nothing to do with Mr. President's directive. They were doing it on their own. And I can tell you because the Internal Revenue Service for the FCT was established a few years back. It's the newest of all the, so like you said, we don't know whether it's a state, but for this purpose and for tax purposes, it operates like a state. So my friend who heads the IRS for the FCT, along with other policymakers, has been trying so hard to harmonize taxes. And he's facing a lot of resistance, including sponsored campaigns against what he's doing. Whereas what the data shows us again and again, whether it's Kaduna State, where the former governor was able to increase the revenue by more than 300% within 5 years, or Ondo State doing about the same thing, one thing has been consistent: they harmonized the tax. In fact, Kaduna State harmonized the tax laws such that it was one code. Whether it's local government or state, if you cannot find it in this one law, it is illegal. And nobody should pay cash, you pay electronically, and their collection went over the roof. So I can tell you what they're doing in Abuja is not the way to go. It's our past. We want to move away from it because the future is what we're looking towards.
All right, we'll take a short break here. When we return, there'll be more about fiscal policy and tax reforms with Mr. Taiwo Oyedele. Stay with us.
NTA Tuesday Live, a network issue-oriented innovation talk show.
Why should we be in a difficult situation financially?
Once upon a time we were rich, but we are not a rich country anymore.
Disaster management is everybody's business.
In all these times, the organization turned to Nigeria.
We would as much want to harness the capacity that is within us so that we see how we can become self-reliant.
1 month ended and you said you are increasing warning strike by 2 months. I mean, you are incubating madness.
Even if these are officials of government who have been told to go and enforce the law and they have gone against the law itself, they must be held accountable.
One-on-One, Friday, 10:30 p.m. on NTA Network.
Thanks for staying with us. The program continues with Taiwo Oyedele, Chairman, Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reform. I'd just like to take a bit here and talk about this matter of taxation still and how people feel about it. Increase the collection of taxes while reducing the number of taxes collectible. Doesn't that provide the grounds for fears of people having to pay more? Because the feeling is, well, if they're going to reduce the number of taxes you pay, then chances are will be made to pay more. And given the situation, there are lots and lots of people who think that there should be a class who should be exempt because of very little income.
Agree. So this is actually something I've advocated for many years. So I would say that I was one of the, frontline advocates for the exemption we got over the past 2-3 years. One of it, I mentioned before, was exempting minimum wage from tax. And it was easy for me to do the analysis. It says if you earn 3,000 naira per annum, you were exempted from tax.
30,000.
Yeah, no, it was 3,000
Okay,
at
yes,
the time.
At that time.
Yes. So 3,000 naira per annum wasn't making sense. So what I did was to go back in time when that 3,000 was included in the law. And it was a time when naira was stronger than pound sterling.
Okay.
So, which means there was the intention even at that time to not tax poverty. But we left it without amending it. It became ridiculous. So we said starting point is, why don't you start with minimum wage? And that's how we landed at 30,000 naira, which is currently tax exempt. What we hope to achieve, because I've also done my own initial analysis, which is if you draw the line on poverty, and you say average family size in Nigeria is 5. If you're lucky, 2 are working, mostly the parents. So 2 people have to earn enough to take care of 5. So when you do the calculation, before Naira was, unified, when it was 460, it came to 70,000 Naira per month per person, which meant if you tax anyone earning 70,000 or less per month, you were taxing poverty. We're going to do that calculation again. Whatever that gives us, we'll try and push and say, below this threshold, you should not tax anyone. In the UK now, it's, I think, about £13,000. That's a lot of money. You don't pay tax on it. Secondly, we managed to get the exemption threshold for value-added tax. Before we got that exemption, if someone was hawking, cola nuts on the street because they couldn't find any job to do, they were meant, in fact, the vulcanizer was meant to prepare accounts, file returns, and pay VAT. How on earth is that even possible? Those people can't prepare any returns to save their lives. So we enacted a law that turned more than half of our small and nano businesses to evaders and offenders of the law. We knew we couldn't enforce it. Why is it there? So we landed at 25 million naira per annum. You don't have to worry about VAT.
Okay.
So the plan now is look at those thresholds again and see whether they still make sense. Of course, I can say categorically we're not going to reduce any of them. We're hoping to be able to increase them so that the burden on the poor is reduced.
Speaking of VAT, that's another vexed issue about what actually, you hear about most things said about Nigeria. VAT is still the least in so many countries of the world, and that has not gone down well. At a point in time, you recall when VAT was increased, there's a lot of resistance.
Yes. So again, it was because sometimes we have even people who are in quote friends of Nigeria. They bring templates from other countries, from the rest of the world, and they want to just, the way they say, when you copy, don't just paste. You can paste special so that you localize it. So in Nigeria, the VAT rate is 7.5%. It seems like one of the lowest in the world, but that's not how it feels, because in more than 100 countries around the world where they have VAT, you get an input credit. In other words, if you're selling this iPad, you bought it from somewhere, they charge you VAT. When you sell it, you collect VAT and you offset that which you paid before so that you don't carry the burden of the VAT. So at the end of the day, the burden is not cascading. But in Nigeria, the VAT system has been designed that if you are rendering services, they say you cannot claim your input credits. You buy asset for your business, government says you cannot claim the input credits, and so on and so forth. So there's a long list of what you cannot claim input credits on, such that even though the headline rate is 7.5%, sometimes it feels like 15%. So what we're saying now is we have to decide whether we really want a value-added system or a sales tax. Sales tax, you don't get the input credit. The rate is meant to be low, maybe like 5%. VAT can be as high as 10-15%, but you give me all the input credit. So that reform is part of what my committee will be looking into, so that, and beyond that, you also have to design it in a way that basic consumption, food, healthcare, education don't carry VAT, so that the poor people, like Mr. President has said, can breathe.
All right. Oh, the tough one of the things he said was to do with the disconnect between fiscal policy and other economic policies, and that a lot of times, even within levels of government, agencies were acting out of tandem, not in tandem with it. Now, this is a difficult aspect for it, and which is confusing to many people. Nigeria's fiscal policies have always been described as not being up to speed. You have work to do. Your work is cut out for you for just 1 year. I'm wondering how you're going to go about this.
Yes, excellent question. So when it comes to fiscal matters, it has 3 important dimensions. One is revenue, and those will be both tax and non-tax revenues. The second one is spending. How do you even spend the money after you've collected it? on what are you spending the money? Should I build an airport as a governor when there's no primary schools that are equipped with the right teachers and materials? So that's about spending. And the third aspect is debt management, because sometimes the money is not enough, you have to borrow. How do you manage it? All those have to work together. So we call it an integrated strategy. Next to that is, when you take that fiscal policy that has 3 legs, how does it interface and handshake with monetary authority, with industrial policy, with trade, with international issues, with exchange of information? Nigeria was redesigning, I don't know whether we're still going to continue with it, we're redesigning the currency, and the finance minister at the time said, I heard like anyone else. That's the first place I've ever heard on earth that a country will redesign their currency without carrying along the fiscal authorities. Because when people have money that they cannot account for, and you say you want to redesign, they're forced to bring it out, otherwise they will lose it. As they're bringing it out, you collect that data. You say, uncle, this is your 10 million. Can you explain the source? And how come you didn't report it? So that connection, on one hand, horizontally, between policy organs and agencies at the federal, and then vertically, right, local government, state government. Because as a Nigerian, if my life is unnecessarily being complicated, I don't care whether it's coming from local government or state or federal government, I just know that my life is not easy. So they need to find a way to work together in harmony so that the outcome of the experience that our people have is something they can be proud of. This is why Nigerians, particularly the young people, they will relocate today to the US, to Canada, or to UK, and they'll go and give testimonies. It's not that they know that or think that the tax rates are low in those countries. Of course, the rates are high. But the good thing is you have a better life because the taxpayer money is being used to take care of the people. So this is what we're hoping we'll be able to achieve as we go along.
You talked initially about having done some work in these matters, and even in some states where there was sharp resistance. Now the president says he's giving you the powers and asking that all agencies collaborate and cooperate with you as you do your work. However, I'm looking at the other end of it. For the small folks, they probably don't have a chance or a choice. They just go with what's been recommended and what comes out. For the elephants, the proverbial elephants in the room that fight back.
Yes, so Mr. President has been very clear about saying government agencies and whoever is important as a stakeholder needs to work with us because we can't do this alone. It requires everybody to collaborate. Yes, you are right. People who have resources, people who benefit from the status quo would fight back because human beings generally are selfish first and foremost. So they think about themselves before they think about the larger interest. It's even so bad, in my view, that we have too many people who think about themselves first, themselves next, and themselves last. They'll never think about anybody else. So those people will fight back and we'll try our best to, bring them on board. We don't think there are people who set out to just be evil or bad. Sometimes it's because they see things differently. We'll try and bring them on board. But we think that the vast majority of the work we need to do are people who want the best for the country. Nobody has just given them, before now, a picture that shows how it can be rather than how it has always been. And that journey, we can then travel through it together. So the small players, the small businesses, the poor people pretty much have no say. Whatever we come up with, they have to deal with it, which is why we're saying this time around, we'll have their voices represented. We have students represented, we have traders represented. We're going to be doing engagement even with Nigerians living with disabilities, because sometimes we don't remember that they are Nigerians as well. And Nigerians in the diaspora, even though they are no longer living with us here, they're still Nigerians and they send us money. So we need to hear them out. So we're going to have that extensive consultation and we would protect the poor and the vulnerable, even though their voice may not be the loudest. And then for the rest, we're actually not against anyone. We want foreign investment. We want big companies. We want domestic companies. We want medium size. We want everybody to thrive. We want to get to a point, like Mr. President said, where we can say that as a country, we're helping people create prosperity. And then we're sharing in that prosperity by way of taxes. Government does not need only the legal powers to be able to tax you. They need the moral right to tax you by saying, I was part of your success story. I provided infrastructure, enabling environment. So that is the way we want to go. Clearly, if what we are collecting today is not what we should be collecting, and we know people in the middle and more even at the top who are not paying, they're not going to be very excited with what we want to do. But we think that they'll get to a point where they have to accept that this is the option that we have, and what we have been doing before is no longer tenable, and we can't continue.
Let me ask you this, for one who has been in tax matters, practicing for so many years. At some point in time, it no longer is. At some point in time, it was fashionable to increase the revenue base of states using private tax companies. And a lot of Nigerians thought that was the way to go. Today, there are some experts who would blame some of the ills in the system on that attempt.
Yes, yes, and I would agree with them. I have seen enough to know that that's part of the problems we have. In fact, the multiple taxation story started with exactly this. It was 1996 with the military, and they came up with, it was something they coined around internally generated revenue. I'm sure some consultant went to them and said, we could help you collect this if only you give us 10%, 15%. And that was how they started. Before we knew it, there were all manners of levies and taxes all over the place. Now, what we also observe today is that some of these consultants, not only do they charge ridiculous amounts to collect the revenue, they also don't, they're not transparent with what they have collected. Globally, the cost of collecting revenue is around 1%. In fact, I've seen before, I sat down with one government, and there's a 35% cost of collection. Who does that? So around the world, you build the capacity of the revenue authorities and their officers, train them well, pay them well, give them the tools they need to work with. Do not engage consultants to collect taxes for you. It's an aberration. I don't know any other country that is doing well with their tax system where they adopt the same format as us. You can bring consultants to train you, develop your strategy, but not to be collecting taxes. It's against our law, actually.
Two quick things as we begin to wind down this conversation. It has to do with moratoriums, tax reliefs, and tax holidays. so many names they are known as. I'd like you to look at that quickly. And again, well, the president says he won't tax poverty. He won't
tax seed. He won't tax fruit. Yes.
Okay. So that brings to mind luxury goods and such taxes. Property tax, for instance, would fall in those ones.
Yes. Let me start with the second one, because this is one of the areas where I think that we have almost what you can call a low-hanging fruit, or maybe someone would even say it's fruit on the floor. You just need to pick it up. In most countries, you find that in the US, for example, the local, government system thrives almost exclusively on property taxes. The thing about it is you can't hide it. I can hide my income from salaries and doing side hustles. I can't hide a property. So government knows where it is, they know the value, and all of that. So we think that government can design properly a way to tax property. You cannot tax poor people who are just trying to find shelter over their head. So you need to design it so that my tamas, the top areas in Abuja, for example, people should pay the right amount. Globally, around 1% of the value a year is what you pay as a property tax. The good thing about it actually is also that money is dedicated almost exclusively to developing the environment, water system, roads. So you see the benefit almost immediately. So that's what we hope to be able to do. So to your first question, around moratoriums and incentives. Yes, this is a big problem. Everybody, if you were doing the same business and you know the right people and you get some exemption, tax breaks, and I don't, I'm going to be desperate to get the same exemption, or I'll just evade my taxes. Otherwise, I can't survive in that industry. You would outprice me because you have free money to play around with. This is not good for the system. So we're going to be looking at that and say, is this incentive, moratorium, tax break, whatever we call it, is it benefiting us? For every 1 naira we spend, are we getting at least 1 naira in return in terms of benefit, both quantifiable and qualitative? If the answer is no, we would stop it. So I envisage that when we are done with this exercise, the number of incentives will be very few. They will be targeted. They will be designed in a way as to come back to the Nigerian people and say, we gave away 1 billion that we should have collected to take care of you, but here is what we got in return. Once that story is not balancing, that's, in fact, we're going to have sunset clauses. So you shouldn't have a tax incentive that is there forever. You want to do an intervention, like now we're talking about fresh subsidy, renewable energy. You cannot put that incentive in the law and leave it for 50 years. This may not be a problem in another 2 years, another 3 years. Maybe we'll all be using solar power and we'll be fine. Or electric vehicles, we won't need diesel and petrol. So these are the things we are looking to bring into our laws and the fiscal space and the taxation system.
Well, it's been interesting talking to you on these matters. We're hoping that we will also be somewhere asking you to update us on the timelines and how far you've achieved these goals. As we say, 1 year within which to do all of this. At the end of the day, we hope that we'll be able to see the results of what this committee is setting up. But there's a new cliche in town, and everywhere you go, you hear people talk about hitting the ground and running. It's a cliche for every part of the country now. So, in the case of this committee, how much of the work have you set yourself to?
Yes, each time I look at the mandate that has been given to us and the timeline, I'll say, God is our strength. But I have to say beyond that, the support has been overwhelming, from the ordinary people to the institutions, organized, even the international community. And Nigerians love Nigeria. You can't take, even the little I have seen since my name was announced, people just keep offering support. We can do this, we can do that. So we think that with that resource base, with the willingness of people to do the right thing, the skills and the capacity, we think is doable. We have made progress. We will continue to make progress.
All right. And it is on that optimistic note we will end this conversation and say thank you so very much, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, Chairman, Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy and Tax Reforms. Thank you for coming on this program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Right. And that's our program today. We thank you for watching. Next week, we'll be back with One-on-One. I'm Cyril Stover. Bye for now.